The sound of metal against wood echoed through the darkness as Anna Hayes pulled desperately at the iron shackles that bound her wrists to the rotting barn wall. 3 days had passed since she'd last tasted water, and her lips were cracked and bleeding from the Kansas heat that poured through the gaps in the weathered planks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The stench of decay and animal waste filled her nostrils, but it was the silence that terrified her most, the complete absence of any human voice that might signal rescue or hope. Her captors had vanished into the prairie 2 sunrises ago, leaving her to die slowly in this forgotten corner of the frontier. The barn creaked and groaned with each gust of wind, and Anna had begun to wonder if these would be the last sounds she'd ever hear. Her wedding dress, once pristine white silk that had cost David every penny he'd saved from 3 seasons of wheat farming, now hung in tatters around her skeletal frame. But Anna Hayes wasn't ready to surrender to the darkness just yet. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of Millbrook, Kansas, as Anna carefully folded her grandmother's quilt and placed it in the bottom of the wooden trunk. Today was supposed to be the beginning of everything she and David had dreamed about for the past 2 years. Their small farmhouse had been sold to the Hendersons, the family who'd been sharecropping the land adjacent to theirs, and every possession they owned was now packed into 3 modest crates and 2 leather satchels. David burst through the front door, his boots caked with mud from the morning chores, carrying a bundle of legal documents in his weathered hands. His face was flushed with excitement, and Anna could see the spark in his green eyes that had first captured her heart during the church social 3 summers ago. He was a man of few words, but when he smiled like this, Anna felt like she could see straight through to his soul. "The Henderson boy just rode back from town," David announced, setting the papers on their small kitchen table with ceremonial importance. "The bank confirmed everything. We've got enough saved to buy that plot of land outside Silver Falls, Anna. 200 acres of prime grazing land, and the seller's even throwing in the livestock that's already there." Anna wiped her hands on her apron and moved to examine the documents, though she trusted David's judgment completely. The deed described rolling hills perfect for cattle ranching, with natural spring water and established fencing. It was everything they'd talked about during those long winter evenings when the wind howled across the Kansas plains, and they'd dream aloud about building something bigger than their small wheat farm. 200 acres, Anna repeated softly, running her finger along the property boundaries marked on the rough survey map. "David, that's more land than anyone in our families has ever owned." David pulled her close, his calloused hands gentle against her face. "We're going to build something real out there, Anna. Something that'll last for our children and their children. No more worrying about whether the wheat will survive the next drought or if the bank will call in the loan early." The plan was simple in the way that the best dreams often are. They would join the wagon train, departing from Cedar Ridge in 3 days, along with 5 other families making the journey west to Colorado Territory. The route would take them through Nebraska and into the mountain passes where Silver Falls, nestled in a valley that promised mild winters and abundant grass for livestock. David had corresponded with a rancher named Thomas McKenna, who'd agreed to sell them the land and help them get established in exchange for working his own spread during their first season. Anna had spent weeks preparing for the journey, stitching, extra clothes, preserving food, and learning everything she could about cattle ranching from the farming almanacs David borrowed from the town library. She'd grown up helping her father with his small herd of dairy cows, but cattle ranching was an entirely different endeavor. The responsibility felt overwhelming and thrilling at the same time. Their neighbors had thrown them a farewell celebration. The previous Saturday, with Mrs. Peterson's famous apple pie and old Sam Rodriguez playing his fiddle late into the evening. Anna had danced with David under the stars, surrounded by the faces of people who'd watched them grow up, fall in love, and now prepare to chase their dreams into the unknown. Several of the younger couples had confided their own plans to head west within the year, inspired by David and Anna's courage to take the leap. "You're sure about this?" Anna had asked David that night as they walked home hand in hand, the sounds of the celebration fading behind them. "We're giving up everything we know, everyone we know." David had stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Anna, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. This land, it's good land, but it's small. Out there, we can build something that matters. We can be more than we ever could be here." The morning of their departure arrived with typical Kansas drama, threatening clouds on the horizon and a wind that bent the wheat stalks nearly horizontal. Anna wore her traveling dress, a practical brown wool that would hide the dust and dirt of the trail, with her mother's silver locket tucked safely beneath the high collar. David loaded their belongings onto the sturdy wagon he'd purchased from the blacksmith, testing every rope and examining every wheel twice. The wagon train assembled at Cedar Ridge just after dawn, a collection of families and single men, all carrying the same mixture of excitement and anxiety that Anna felt churning in her stomach. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Captain Morris, who'd made this journey 17 times, inspected each wagon and its load with military precision. He explained the rules clearly: stay with the group, follow orders without question, and understand that the frontier showed no mercy to those who made foolish decisions. Anna climbed onto the wagon seat beside David as Captain Morris gave the signal to move out. The oxen strained against their harnesses, and slowly the heavy wagon began to roll forward. Anna turned for one last look at Millbrook, watching the church steeple and the grain elevator grow smaller until they disappeared entirely behind the swells of prairie grass. The first week of travel fell into a rhythm that Anna found surprisingly comforting. Each morning they would break camp before sunrise, eat a cold breakfast, and begin the slow, steady progress across the endless grasslands. David walked alongside, the oxen most of the day, guiding them around prairie dog holes and patches of rough ground, while Anna either walked beside him or rode on the wagon seat, mending clothes or writing in the journal she'd promised to keep for her sister back home. The other families in their group were good people. The Williamses had 3 young children and were heading to Denver, where Mr. Williams had a job waiting with the railroad. The O'Briens were an older couple whose grown sons had already established a farm in Colorado and wanted their parents to join them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There was also Jake Morrison, a single man about David's age who'd been a soldier in the war and now sought his fortune in the silver mines. Anna particularly enjoyed the company of Margaret Williams, whose 8-year-old daughter Lucy had taken to riding alongside Anna's wagon during the long afternoon hours. Lucy was full of questions about everything they saw, from the different types of grass to the hawks circling overhead, and Anna found herself learning as much as she taught during their conversations. The evenings were Anna's favorite time. After the wagons formed their protective circle and the animals were secured, the families would gather around a communal fire to share dinner and stories. David proved to be an excellent storyteller, entertaining the group with tales from his childhood and embellished accounts of their farming adventures. Anna contributed by teaching some of the women how to make bread that would stay fresh during the long travel days. Everything changed on their 10th day out from Cedar Ridge. They'd been making good time across a particularly flat stretch of Nebraska territory when riders appeared on the horizon. At first, Captain Morris thought they might be other travelers or perhaps cavalry from the nearby fort, But as the riders drew closer, it became clear that these men meant trouble. There were 6 of them, rough-looking characters, with weapons prominently displayed and the kind of hard eyes that spoke of violence as a way of life. Their leader, a tall man with a black beard and a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, rode directly up to Captain Morris and began making demands. "We're collecting taxes on behalf of the territorial government," the scarred man announced, though everyone knew there was no such tax and no authority behind his words. "Every wagon pays $50 or you don't pass through our land." Captain Morris, to his credit, stood firm. "This is public territory, friend. We're not paying any taxes to road agents." The confrontation escalated quickly. Words became threats, threats became drawn weapons, and suddenly the afternoon exploded into chaos. Anna watched in horror as the bandits opened fire on the wagon. Train. Captain Morris fell first, clutching his chest as he collapsed beside his horse. The oxen began bellowing and straining against their harnesses as gunshots echoed across the prairie. David grabbed Anna's hand and pulled her toward the back of their wagon. "Stay down," he shouted over the noise. "Get behind the supplies and don't move." Anna crouched behind their trunk, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She could hear David returning fire with the rifle he'd purchased for hunting along the trail. The shooting seemed to go on forever, though it probably lasted only minutes. When the silence finally came, it was more terrifying than the noise had been. She heard David's voice calling her name, relief evident in his tone. "Anna, it's over. They're gone." Anna emerged from her hiding place to find a scene of devastation. Captain Morris was dead, as was Mr. O'Brien. Margaret Williams was wounded in the shoulder but alive, and her husband was trying to stop the bleeding with torn pieces of cloth. The bandits had fled after realizing the settlers were better armed than they'd expected, but not before they'd accomplished their primary goal. "They took Lucy," Margaret Williams sobbed, her good arm reaching toward the empty prairie where the riders had disappeared. "They took my little girl." The remaining members of the wagon train faced an impossible choice. They could continue toward their destination, leaving Lucy Williams to whatever fate awaited her, or they could pursue the bandits into territory they didn't know, risking more lives in what might be a hopeless rescue attempt. David made the decision that would change everything. "I'm going after her," he announced, already checking his rifle and gathering supplies. "That little girl doesn't deserve what's going to happen to her if we do nothing." Anna didn't hesitate. "I'm coming with you." "Anna, no, it's too dangerous." David Hayes, that child spent every afternoon walking beside our wagon, asking me about flowers and birds and telling me about her dreams. "I'm not abandoning her now." Jake Morrison stepped forward. "Count me in. I've tracked men before." Against the protests of the other survivors, David, Anna, and Jake set out to follow the bandits' trail. The tracks were easy to follow at first, leading northeast toward a line of low hills that marked the edge of more broken country. They pushed hard, hoping to close the distance before nightfall. As the sun began to set, they spotted smoke rising from a valley ahead. Jake, who had the most military experience, scouted ahead and returned with grim news. The bandits had made camp near an abandoned homestead, and Lucy was being held in an old barn. There were definitely 6 men, all armed, and they were clearly planning to stay the night before moving on. The rescue attempt went wrong from the beginning. The bandits had posted a guard they hadn't seen, and the alarm was raised before David, Anna, and Jake could get close to the barn. In the gunfight that followed, Jake was killed and David was mortally wounded. Anna found herself captured, her hands bound with rope, watching helplessly as David bled to death in the dirt beside the barn where Lucy Williams was being held. The bandit leader, the scarred man who'd started this whole nightmare, stood over David's body and looked down at Anna with cold calculation. "Well now, looks like we've got ourselves some extra merchandise. Please." Anna whispered, her voice hoarse with grief and terror. "Just let the child go. She's done nothing to you." The man laughed, a sound devoid of any human warmth. "That little girl's going to make us good money in Denver. There's men there who pay well for young ones. As for you, we'll see what the market looks like." They chained Anna to the barn wall, using shackles that had probably been used for livestock, leaving her in the darkness, with only Lucy's quiet sobbing for company. The little girl was shackled on the opposite wall, barely visible in the gloom that filtered through the gaps in the wooden planks. "Mrs. Hayes," Lucy whispered, "are we going to die here?" Anna closed her eyes and tried to find strength she wasn't sure she possessed. David was dead. Jake was dead. Captain Morris and Mr. O'Brien were dead. The wagon train was probably continuing west without them, assuming they were all lost. But this little girl was depending on her. And Anna Hayes had never backed down from a responsibility in her life. "No, Lucy," Anna said firmly, testing the strength of the shackles that held her wrists. "We're not going to die here. We're going to find a way out of this, and we're going to survive." The bandits left the next morning, talking about meeting buyers in a town called Broken Creek, 3 days' ride north. They left Anna and Lucy with no food and only a bucket of stagnant water that had probably been used for the horses. The barn became their prison, their world reduced to the space between the walls that reeked of decay and abandonment. Anna spent the first day testing every inch of the wall where her shackles were attached, looking for loose boards or rusted metal that might give way. The chains were solid, but the barn itself was old and weathered. If she could work at it long enough, she might be able to pull the mounting hardware loose from the rotting wood. By the second day, Anna's fingertips were bloody from clawing at the wall, but she'd managed to loosen one of the bolts that held her shackles. Lucy had grown quiet, conserving her strength, but Anna kept talking to her, telling her stories about the farm back in Kansas and the adventures they'd planned for their new life in Colorado. The third day brought delirium from thirst and hunger, but also a breakthrough. Anna finally worked the bolt loose enough that she could twist it with her fingers. Freedom was perhaps only hours away, but Anna wasn't sure she had hours left. The world was beginning to fade in and out of focus, and she could hear Lucy's breathing, becoming more labored. That was when they heard the sound of a horse approaching the barn. The hoofbeats grew closer, and Anna forced herself to stay silent, despite every instinct screaming at her to call for help. It could be the bandits returning, or it could be someone even worse. In this lawless territory, a lone rider finding 2 helpless women could mean trading one nightmare for another. She pressed herself against the barn wall and held her breath, listening as the horse circled the abandoned homestead. Through a gap in the rotting planks, Anna caught a glimpse of the rider. He was tall and lean, wearing a dark hat pulled low over his face, with a rifle across his saddle and the confident posture of a man accustomed to danger. His horse was a sturdy bay gelding, well cared for but showing the dust and sweat of hard travel. The stranger dismounted and approached the barn with cautious steps, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. "Anyone in there?" The voice was calm, controlled, with a slight accent that Anna couldn't quite place. "I can see the wagon tracks. I know what happened here." Anna's heart pounded as she weighed her options. This could be her only chance at rescue, but it could also be a trap. She glanced across the barn at Lucy, who had lifted her head hopefully at the sound of the stranger's voice. The little girl's eyes were sunken and desperate, and Anna realized they were both probably going to die in this barn if she didn't take the risk. "We're here," Anna called out, her voice cracking from thirst. "We're chained inside. There's a child with me." The barn door creaked open, and sunlight flooded the interior, temporarily blinding Anna after 3 days in near darkness. The stranger stepped inside, and as her eyes adjusted, Anna got her first clear look at their potential. Savior. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His clothes were well-made but practical, and there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested military training. Most striking were his eyes, a deep brown that seemed to take in everything at once. When his gaze fell on Anna and then Lucy, chained to opposite walls like animals, his jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "Mother of God," he muttered, pulling a set of lockpicks from his vest pocket. "What kind of animals do this to women and children?" As he worked on Anna's shackles, she studied his face more closely. There was something familiar about his features, though she was certain they'd never met. His skin had the olive tone that suggested Spanish heritage, and when he spoke, she caught traces of an accent that confirmed her suspicion. "What's your name?" Anna asked as the shackles fell away from her wrists. "Cole Mendoza," he replied, moving quickly to free Lucy. "I've been tracking the men who did this for 2 weeks. They hit a stagecoach near Dodge City, killed the driver and took a strongbox full of silver. When I found your wagon train this morning, the survivors told me what happened." Anna rubbed her raw wrists, trying to restore circulation to her hands. "You're a lawman?" Cole's expression darkened slightly. "Something like that. I track down men who need tracking, and I bring them to justice one way or another." He lifted Lucy gently in his arms, and the little girl clung to him like a lifeline. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration, and Anna could see that the child was in worse condition than she'd realized. They needed water and food immediately, or Lucy might not survive much longer. "There's a stream about a quarter-mile north of here," Cole said, as if reading Anna's thoughts. "Clean water and some shade. Can you walk?" Anna forced herself to stand, swaying slightly as blood rushed to her head. "I can walk." Cole led them to the stream, a clear ribbon of water that wound through a grove of cottonwood trees. Anna knelt beside the water and drank deeply, the cold liquid like a miracle against her parched throat. She helped Lucy drink slowly, knowing that too much water too quickly could make them both sick. While they recovered, Cole unsaddled his horse and built a small fire. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and a tin of peaches that he opened with his knife. The food was simple, but to Anna it tasted better than any meal she'd ever eaten. "The men who took you," Cole said as they ate, "how many were there? Did you hear them say where they were going?" Anna described the 6 bandits, focusing particularly on their scarred leader. When she mentioned the man's plans to sell Lucy in Denver, Cole's expression grew even grimmer. "Slate Morrison," Cole said quietly. "I should have known. He's been running slaves and stolen goods between Kansas and Colorado for the past 5 years. Every time someone gets close to catching him, he disappears into the mountains." "You know him?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "He killed my sister 3 years ago, shot her down in the street in front of her own children because she wouldn't tell him where her husband had hidden their savings. I've been hunting him ever since." The revelation explained the intensity Anna had seen in Cole's eyes when he'd found them in the barn. This wasn't just about justice for him. It was personal. She watched him as he cleaned his rifle with practiced efficiency, and she realized that Cole Mendoza was probably the most dangerous man she'd ever met. The thought should have frightened her, but instead it filled her with a fierce satisfaction. Slate Morrison had killed David, had left her and Lucy to die in that barn, and now he was being hunted by someone who understood the cost of his cruelty. "What happens now?" Anna asked. "Lucy needs to get back to her family, but the wagon train is probably days ahead of us by now." Cole finished cleaning his rifle and looked up at her. "The wagon train's camped about 15 miles west of here. They're waiting to see if any of you survived. I can get Lucy back to her parents, but after that, I'm going after Morrison. The trail's getting cold, and if I lose him now, he'll disappear into the mountains for another year. Anna felt a strange reluctance at the thought of parting ways with Cole. Over the past few hours, she'd begun to feel safe for the first time since the attack on the wagon train. But she also understood that her responsibility was to get Lucy back to her family and then decide what to do with the ruins of her own life. They traveled through the night, with Lucy riding in front of Cole on his saddle and Anna walking alongside. Cole had offered to let her ride, but she found that walking helped clear her head and process everything that had happened. David was dead, their dreams of ranching in Colorado were finished, and she was now alone in a hostile country with no clear path forward. As dawn broke over the prairie, they spotted the smoke from the wagon train's campfires. Margaret Williams saw them coming and ran toward them with tears streaming down her face, calling Lucy's name. The reunion between mother and daughter was emotional enough to bring tears to Anna's eyes, and even Cole seemed moved by the sight. The other survivors gathered around to hear the story of their rescue. Anna told them about Cole's tracking skills and his dedication to bringing the bandits to justice, but she kept his personal connection to Slate Morrison to herself. That was his story to tell, not hers. Captain Morris had been replaced by his second-in-command, a steady man named Franklin who'd made the decision to wait for survivors rather than continue immediately toward Colorado. He thanked Cole profusely for the rescue and offered him payment, which Cole politely declined. "What will you do now, Mrs. Hayes?" Franklin asked. "We'd be honored to have you continue with us to Colorado, but I understand if you want to return to Kansas." Anna looked around at the faces of people who'd become like family during their weeks of travel together. These were good people who'd offered her safety and companionship, but the thought of continuing to Silver Falls without David felt impossible. At the same time, the idea of returning to Kansas, to the farm that was no longer theirs, and the memories that would haunt every familiar place seemed equally unbearable. "I don't know," Anna admitted. "I need time to think." Cole had been preparing to leave, but he paused at her words. "There's another option," he said quietly. "Come with me." The suggestion shocked everyone, including Anna. The idea of a recently widowed woman traveling alone with a strange man was scandalous by any measure, and Anna could see the disapproval in some of the faces around her. "I'm going after Morrison anyway," Cole continued, ignoring the stares. "I could use someone who's seen his operation, who knows how he thinks. And honestly, you've got fire in you, Mrs. Hayes. I saw it in that barn. You didn't give up, even when you had every reason to." Anna stared at him, trying to understand what he was really offering. Was this about justice for David and the others Morrison had killed? Was it about revenge? Or was there something else? Some connection she'd felt developing between them during their brief time together? "Cole, I appreciate what you've done for us," Anna said carefully, "but I'm not a tracker, I'm not a fighter. I'm a farmer's wife who doesn't even have a farm anymore." "You're a survivor," Cole replied firmly, "and Morrison needs to be stopped before he kills more families like yours." The conversation continued throughout the morning as the wagon train prepared to move out. Margaret Williams took Anna aside and offered heartfelt thanks for staying with Lucy in the barn, for giving the little girl hope when there was none. Franklin repeated his offer to escort Anna safely to Colorado or back to Kansas, whichever she preferred, but it was Lucy herself who helped Anna make her decision. The little girl approached her quietly while the adults were debating routes and supplies. "Mrs. Hayes," Lucy said, her small hand slipping into Anna's, "are you going to help Mr. Cole catch the bad men?" "I don't know, sweetheart. It would be very dangerous." Lucy nodded solemnly. "My papa says sometimes people have to do dangerous things to protect other people. Those bad men might hurt more little girls if someone doesn't stop them." "Out." Of the mouths of babes, Anna thought. This 8-year-old child had grasped something that all the adults' arguments had missed. This wasn't just about Anna's personal future, or even about revenge for David's death. Slate Morrison and his gang were still out there, still terrorizing innocent families, still destroying lives for profit. Anna found Cole checking his gear beside his horse. "If I come with you," she said without preamble, "what exactly are you asking me to do?" Cole looked up, his dark eyes serious. "I'm asking you to help me track down the men who killed your husband and tried to sell an innocent child into slavery. I'm asking you to see justice done. And after that? Assuming we survive." Cole was quiet for a moment, and Anna sensed he was wrestling with something he hadn't expected to feel. "After that, you'll have choices. Real choices. Not just between going back to what you've lost or running away from it." Anna extended her hand. "Then I'm coming with you." Cole shook her hand, his grip firm and warm. "Welcome to the hunt, Anna Hayes." The wagon train departed an hour later, continuing west toward their dreams of new lives in Colorado Territory. Anna stood beside Cole and watched until the wagons disappeared over the horizon, carrying with them the last connection to her old life. Margaret Williams had pressed a small bundle of supplies into Anna's hands, along with a whispered prayer for her safety. Now it was just Anna and Cole, alone on the vast prairie, with nothing but determination and the need for justice driving them forward. Cole had picked up Morrison's trail again, tracks that led northeast toward the broken country along the Colorado border. "Morrison knows this territory better than anyone," Cole explained as they rode. Anna was mounted on a horse Cole had purchased from the wagon train, a steady mare named Duchess, who seemed unflappable in the face of the challenges ahead. "He's got hideouts and supply caches scattered throughout the mountains, but he's also got patterns, habits. Every man does, even the clever ones." Anna was learning to read the land the way Cole did, to spot the subtle signs that indicated recent passage. A bent grass stem here, a horse dropping there, the faint impression of a boot heel in soft earth. It was like learning a new language, one written in dust and stone rather than words on paper. "How do you know all this?" Anna asked, as they followed the trail up a rocky slope that offered a commanding view of the surrounding country. "My father was a cavalry scout during the war with Mexico," Cole replied. "He taught me to track before I could properly ride, said a man who couldn't read the land was a man who wouldn't live long on the frontier." "And your mother?" Cole's expression softened slightly. She was from a good Spanish family in Santa Fe, spoke 4 languages, and could calculate numbers faster than most men with formal education. "She taught me that being smart was just as important as being tough." Anna was beginning to understand the complexity of the man riding beside her. Cole Mendoza straddled 2 worlds, Spanish and Anglo, educated and frontier-hardened. It explained both his confidence and the slight wariness she'd noticed when they'd been around the wagon train. In a territory where suspicion often fell on anyone with Mexican heritage, Cole had learned to be self-reliant. They made camp that evening in a sheltered canyon where a small spring provided fresh water and the rocks would hide their fire from distant observation. Cole proved to be an excellent cook, preparing a simple but satisfying meal from their supplies and fish he caught from the spring. "Tell me about Morrison's gang," Anna said as they ate. "How many men does he usually travel with?" "It varies. Sometimes it's just him and 2 or 3 others. Sometimes he's got as many as a dozen. The core group is always the same, though. There's his brother Jake, who's almost as mean as Morrison himself. There's a half-breed named Crow, who's the best tracker I've ever seen besides my father. And there's a kid they call Tennessee, who's fast with a gun and crazy enough to take any risk Morrison asks of him." Anna absorbed this information, trying to understand what they were really up against. And you think the two of us can take on 4 experienced killers?" Cole looked up from his plate, and Anna saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I think the two of us can do things that Morrison won't expect. He's used to dealing with lawmen who follow rules, or bounty hunters who work alone. He's not used to dealing with someone who has personal reasons to see him dead, and someone who's smart enough to think 3 moves ahead." The compliment surprised Anna. In the short time they'd known each other, Cole had seen something in her that she wasn't sure she saw in herself. David had always been the one who made the plans and took the risks. Anna had been content to support his dreams and follow his lead. Now she was being asked to become something entirely different. "What if I'm not as strong as you think I am?" Anna asked quietly. Cole finished eating and leaned back against his saddle. "You sat chained to a barn wall for 3 days, keeping an 8-year-old girl's hopes alive when you had every reason to give up yourself. You're stronger than you think." That night, as Anna lay in her bedroll staring up at the stars, she thought about the conversation. Cole was right about one thing. She had found reserves of strength in that barn that she hadn't known existed. But tracking killers across hostile territory was different from simply enduring captivity. This would require her to actively choose danger, to walk toward violence rather than away from it. The decision felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff, but Anna realized she'd already made it the moment she'd shaken Cole's hand beside the wagon train. David was dead, their farm was gone, and her old life had ended in that barn. Whatever came next would have to be built from nothing, and if she was going to start over, she might as well start as someone who fought back against the darkness rather than someone who simply survived it. As sleep finally claimed her, Anna Hayes began to transform into someone she'd never imagined becoming. A hunter of men, a seeker of justice, and a woman who would not be broken by the cruelties of an unforgiving world. The first real test came 5 days into their pursuit, when Morrison's trail led them into the badlands of eastern Colorado. The landscape had transformed from rolling prairie into a maze of eroded canyons and wind-carved rock formations that seemed designed to swallow travelers without a trace. Cole studied the ground carefully, his practiced eye reading sign that Anna was only beginning to recognize. "They split up here," Cole announced, dismounting to examine a collection of hoofprints near a cluster of red sandstone pillars. "Morrison's smart enough to know someone might be following. He sent riders in 3 different directions." Anna climbed down from Duchess and approached the tracks, trying to apply what Cole had been teaching her about reading the subtle differences in hoof shapes and gait patterns. The prints were confusing, overlapping, and deliberately obscured, but she could make out at least 3 distinct sets heading toward different points of the compass. "Which trail do we follow?" Anna asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer from Cole's grim expression. "We don't follow any of them," Cole replied, studying the towering rock formations that surrounded them. "This is a trap. Morrison's used this trick before. While we're chasing shadows through these canyons, he and his main group are probably circling around behind us." The realization sent a chill down Anna's spine. They were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted. Cole's reputation as a tracker had preceded him, and Morrison was experienced enough to turn that advantage against them. Anna looked around at the maze of stone walls and narrow passages, suddenly feeling very exposed despite the apparent shelter. "What do we do?" Anna kept her voice steady, though her heart was racing. Cole was already moving, gathering their horses, and scanning the canyon walls above them. "We get to high ground before they get the chance to pin us down here. These canyons are perfect for an ambush, but they also limit movement. If we can get above them, we turn the tables." They led their horses up a treacherous game trail that wound between towering spires of sandstone, the path so narrow in places that Anna had to press herself against the rock face to avoid looking down it. The dizzying drop below. The horses were nervous, their hooves sliding on loose gravel, but Duchess proved her worth by following Cole's bay gelding with steady determination. Halfway up the trail, Anna heard the sound that confirmed Cole's suspicions, the distant echo of hoofbeats in the canyon below. Morrison's men had indeed doubled back, and they were moving fast through the maze of stone corridors, following the obvious tracks that Cole and Anna had left behind. "How many?" Anna whispered, as they reached a narrow ledge that offered a view of the canyon floor. Cole counted silently, his eyes tracking movement through the labyrinth below. 4 riders. That's Morrison's core group, just like I expected. The decoy trails were probably set by local men he hired for the purpose. Anna watched the riders navigate the twisting passages below, their movements confident and coordinated. These weren't desperate outlaws stumbling through unfamiliar territory. They were experienced fighters who knew exactly what they were doing. The scarred man she recognized as Slate Morrison rode in the lead, his posture alert as he studied the ground for signs of their passage. "They're good," Anna observed, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. "Yes, they are," Cole agreed, "but they're also predictable. Morrison's been using the same tactics for years because they work. He counts on people panicking when they realize they're being hunted." Cole began unpacking his rifle, a well-maintained Winchester that showed the wear of frequent use. "Here's what's going to happen. They'll follow our trail to the point where it starts up this cliff, and then they'll have to decide whether to follow us up or wait for us to come down. Morrison's too smart to split his forces, so they'll probably try to wait us out." Anna studied the canyon below, beginning to understand Cole's strategy. "But we're not coming down the same way we went up." "Exactly. There's another trail on the far side of this ridge that leads down into the next canyon over. While they're watching this cliff face, we'll be circling around behind them." The plan made sense, but Anna could see the flaws in it as well. What if they don't cooperate? What if they decide to follow us up? Cole's smile was grimly satisfied. "Then we have the advantage of high ground and good cover. Either way, we control the engagement instead of letting them dictate terms." They moved carefully along the ridge, staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. Anna was learning to move quietly, to test each step before committing her full weight, to avoid dislodging loose stones that might give away their position. It was exhausting work, requiring constant attention to detail, but she found herself adapting to the demands more quickly than she'd expected. The descent into the adjacent canyon was even more treacherous than the climb had been. The trail switchbacked down a steep slope covered with loose shale that shifted and slid under their feet. Anna's boots were designed for farm work, not mountain climbing, and several times she had to grab onto Cole's arm to keep from falling. Each time she noticed how steady he was, how his presence seemed to radiate calm competence, even in the most dangerous moments. They reached the canyon floor just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and crimson. Cole led them through a series of narrow passages, following what appeared to be an ancient watercourse that had carved deep channels through the stone. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft sound of their horses' hooves on sand, and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. "There," Cole whispered, pointing toward a gap between 2 towering pillars of stone. "That passage leads back to the canyon where we left Morrison's men. If we're lucky, they're still waiting for us to come down." Anna checked the small revolver Cole had given her, a compact weapon that felt foreign in her hands, despite the practice sessions they'd held during their journey. She'd never imagined herself carrying a gun, much less preparing to use it against another human being. But the memory of David's death and her days chained in that barn had hardened something inside her. They left the horses hidden in a grove of stunted juniper trees and proceeded on foot through the narrow passage. The walls rose high on either side, creating a natural corridor that muffled sound and blocked most of the remaining daylight. Anna followed Cole's lead, placing her feet exactly where he placed his, mimicking his careful, silent progress through the stone maze. The passage opened onto a natural balcony overlooking the canyon where they'd first spotted Morrison's men. Below them, exactly as Cole had predicted, 4 figures sat around a small fire, their horses picketed nearby. They had positioned themselves with a clear view of the cliff trail, waiting patiently for their quarry to descend. Anna studied the men who had destroyed her life, seeing them clearly for the first time since the attack on the wagon train. Slate. Morrison was exactly as she remembered. Tall, scarred, radiating the kind of casual cruelty that made violence seem like a natural choice. His brother Jake was smaller but somehow more menacing, with nervous energy that suggested a man always on the edge of explosion. The half-breed tracker called Crow sat apart from the others, his attention focused on the cliff face above, with predatory intensity. The youngest member of the group, Tennessee, couldn't have been more than 20, but the way he wore his guns suggested someone who'd already killed more men than most soldiers. "We could pick them off from here," Anna whispered, surprised by her own coldness. Cole shook his head. "Too risky. If we don't get them all with the first shots, the survivors will have cover among those rocks. Besides, I want Morrison alive if possible. Dead men can't tell you where they've hidden their stolen goods or who they've been working with." Anna understood the practical reasoning, but part of her rebelled against the idea of showing mercy to men who had shown none to David or the other innocent people they'd killed. The desire for simple revenge burned in her chest like a coal, but she recognized that Cole's way was smarter, more likely to result in real justice rather than just momentary satisfaction. They waited until full darkness had settled over the canyon before making their move. Cole had identified a route that would bring them down behind Morrison's camp, using the maze of boulders and rock formations for cover. It would require perfect timing and absolute silence, but it would give them the advantage of surprise. The descent was a nightmare of controlled fear. Every loose stone threatened to betray their presence. Every shadow might conceal a sentry they hadn't spotted from above. Anna found herself holding her breath for long stretches, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure it could be heard throughout the canyon. But Cole moved like a ghost, and Anna did her best to match his supernatural quiet. They were within 50 feet of the camp when everything went wrong. A loose rock, dislodged by Anna's boot, went clattering down the slope with a sound like gunshots. In the profound silence, instantly the camp below erupted into motion as Morrison's men rolled away from their fire and reached for weapons. "So much for surprise," Cole muttered, drawing his pistol and firing in one smooth motion. The canyon exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning, and the sound of gunfire echoed and re-echoed off the stone walls until it was impossible to tell how many weapons were being fired or from which direction. Anna pressed herself against a boulder and tried to spot targets in the confusion below, but the combination of darkness and gunsmoke made accurate shooting nearly impossible. Cole was moving among the rocks like a man possessed, using every scrap of cover to stay ahead of the return fire while keeping up a steady barrage of his own. Anna could hear him calling out positions and warnings, treating her like a partner rather than a burden, despite her obvious inexperience in combat. "Morrison's moving toward the horses," Cole shouted over the noise. "Don't let him reach them." Anna spotted the scarred leader working his way through the shadows toward the picket line where their mounts were tethered. Without thinking, she stepped out from behind her boulder and fired 3 quick shots in his direction. The bullets sparked off rocks near Morrison's position, forcing him to dive for cover and abandon his attempt to escape. The momentary exposure cost Anna dearly. Crow, the tracker, had spotted her muzzle flash and sent a bullet whistling past her ear so close she could feel the wind of its passage. Anna threw herself behind another rock, her hands shaking as she tried to reload the unfamiliar weapon. "Stay down!" Cole called. "I'm moving to flank them." Anna watched Cole work his way around the perimeter of the fight, using shadows and terrain to stay invisible while he maneuvered for a better angle. His movements were those of a professional, someone who'd been in this situation many times before and understood exactly how to use the environment to his advantage. The turning point came when Jake Morrison made the mistake of trying to rush Anna's position. The younger Morrison brother had apparently decided that she represented the weaker target, and he came charging through the rocks with his pistol blazing, counting on speed and aggression to carry him through. Anna surprised herself by remaining calm as the wild-eyed gunman bore down on her. She waited until he was close enough that missing would be impossible, then put 2 bullets center mass into his chest. Jake Morrison spun around and collapsed among the boulders, his weapon flying. From nerveless fingers, the death of his brother seemed to break something in Slate Morrison's tactical thinking. Instead of continuing to use cover and coordinated fire, he began screaming curses and firing wildly in all directions. Tennessee, the young gunfighter, tried to maintain some semblance of discipline, but Crow the tracker had already begun working his way toward an escape route through the rocks. Cole ended the fight with a single, perfectly placed shot that took Tennessee down just as the young killer was drawing a bead on Anna's position. With 2 of his men dead and the 3rd in full retreat, Slate Morrison finally accepted the reality of his situation and threw down his weapons. "Don't shoot," Morrison called out, his hands raised above his head. "I surrender." Cole emerged from the shadows with his rifle trained on the outlaw leader. "Kick your weapons away and lie face down on the ground." Morrison complied, though Anna could see the calculation in his eyes as he searched for any opportunity to turn the situation back in his favor. She kept her own weapon trained on him, while Cole secured his hands with rope from their supplies. "You made a mistake tracking me, bounty hunter," Morrison said, as Cole bound his wrists. "There's folks who won't appreciate you interfering with their business arrangements." "What kind of business arrangements?" Cole demanded, tightening. "The ropes," Morrison laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "The kind that involves silver shipments from the mines and cattle herds that need to disappear without too many questions being asked. You think I've been working alone all these years?" Anna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Morrison was implying connections to legitimate businesses, people with enough power and influence to make trouble for anyone who interfered with their operations. She began to understand why the outlaw had been able to operate with such impunity for so long. "Who's backing you?" Cole pressed. But Morrison just smiled and refused to say more. They made camp in a defensible position among the rocks, taking turns standing watch over their prisoner. Crow had escaped into the darkness, and Anna knew the tracker would probably try to free his leader, or at least warn Morrison's other associates about what had happened. The night passed slowly, filled with the sounds of desert predators and the occasional movement from Morrison testing his bonds. Dawn revealed the full extent of their victory. 2 of Morrison's core group were dead, and they had the leader himself in custody, but Anna also realized that this was probably just the beginning. Morrison's hints about business partners and ongoing operations suggested a network that extended far beyond one gang of outlaws. "What do we do with him?" Anna asked as they prepared to break camp. Cole studied their prisoner with obvious distaste. "We take him to the nearest federal marshal and let the law sort it out. But first, we're going to visit his hideout and see what we can learn about these business partners he mentioned." Morrison's expression darkened. "You'll never find it. That country up there will kill you both before you get within 10 miles of the place." "Maybe," Cole agreed calmly. But you're going to tell us exactly where it is and how to get there safely, because if you don't, I'm going to leave you chained to a tree for the wolves to find, just like you left Mrs. Hayes and that little girl in that barn." For the first time since his capture, Slate Morrison looked genuinely frightened. Anna watched the interplay between the two men and realized that Cole had found exactly the right pressure point. Morrison was a killer and a thief, but he was also a man who understood that some fates were worse than death. "There's a box canyon about 30 miles north of here," Morrison said reluctantly. "Hidden entrance through a crack in the rocks that you'd ride past 100 times without seeing. We've been using it as a supply depot for the better part of 3 years." Cole pressed for more details. Landmarks, hazards, the number of men who might be guarding the site. Morrison provided the information grudgingly, clearly hoping they would ride into a trap, but Cole's experience showed, as he asked pointed questions that revealed inconsistencies and forced more complete answers. Anna listened to the interrogation, while she packed their supplies, marveling at how much her world had changed in the space of just a few weeks. A month ago, she'd been a farmer's wife, worried about wheat prices and the weather. Now she was part of a team hunting outlaws through some of the most dangerous country in the West, and she was discovering capabilities she'd never suspected she possessed. The transformation wasn't complete yet, but Anna could feel it happening. With each challenge overcome, each moment of courage summoned from reserves she hadn't known existed, David would have been proud of her strength, but he probably wouldn't have recognized the woman she was becoming. Anna wasn't sure she recognized herself, but she was beginning to like the person she was discovering in the crucible of the frontier. The journey to Morrison's hidden canyon took them through some of the most unforgiving terrain Anna had ever encountered. They traveled through landscapes that seemed designed to break the spirit of anyone foolish enough to venture into them. Towering mesas that blocked out the sun for hours at a time, alkali flats where the horses' hooves raised clouds of caustic dust that burned the throat and eyes, and narrow defiles where flash floods had carved channels so deep that the sky was reduced to a thin ribbon of blue far overhead. Morrison rode with his hands bound to his saddle horn, maintaining a sullen silence except when Cole demanded directions. Anna could see the outlaw leader studying the terrain constantly, looking for opportunities to escape or mislead them into danger. Cole seemed to anticipate every potential betrayal, checking Morrison's directions against his own reading of the land, and making subtle course corrections that kept them away from obvious ambush sites. On the second day of their journey into the high country, they encountered their first serious test of endurance. A late spring storm rolled down from the peaks without warning, transforming the clear morning into a maelstrom of driving snow and howling wind. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in as many minutes, and Anna found herself struggling to stay in the saddle as Duchess fought to maintain footing on increasingly treacherous ground. Cole called a halt in the shelter of a rock overhang that provided minimal protection from the elements. They huddled together with the horses, sharing what warmth they could while the storm raged around them. Morrison seemed to take perverse pleasure in their discomfort, muttering about city folks who had no business in real mountain country. "This is nothing," Morrison said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Wait until you see what that canyon's like in a real storm. Men have frozen to death trying to find the entrance when the weather turns." Anna ignored the outlaws' attempts at intimidation, but she couldn't ignore the very real danger of their situation. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and their supplies of warm clothing were limited. She found herself pressed close to Cole for warmth, acutely aware of his steady presence and the way he seemed to radiate calm competence even in the worst circumstances. "Tell me about your sister," Anna said quietly, partly to distract herself from the cold, and partly because she wanted to understand what drove Cole's relentless pursuit of justice. Cole was silent for a long moment, and Anna thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of grief that she recognized from her own loss. Elena was 2 years younger than me, but she was always the one who took care of everyone else. When our parents died of cholera, she kept our family together. She married a good man, a shopkeeper in a little town called Harmony Creek, and they had 2 children, beautiful kids with their mother's eyes and their father's gentle nature. Anna could hear the love in Cole's voice, and also the pain that came with talking about someone who was gone forever. Morrison and his gang hit the town on a Tuesday morning, Cole continued. They'd heard that Elena's husband had been keeping the receipts from the cattle buyers in his safe instead of depositing them right away at the bank. It was true, but only because the bank was 20 miles away, and he only made the trip once a week. The wind howled around their shelter, but Anna found herself completely focused on Cole's story. Elena could have told them where the money was hidden. Her husband would have given it up in a heartbeat to keep his family safe. But Morrison didn't, asked politely. He started by shooting Elena's husband in the legs, then threatened to do worse to the children if Elena didn't cooperate immediately. Anna felt her heart clench with sympathetic pain. She could imagine the impossible choice Elena had faced, the desperate calculation of a mother trying to protect her children. She told him where the money was, Cole said quietly. All of it. But Morrison shot her anyway, right there in front of her children, because she'd made him wait 30 seconds longer than he wanted to wait. The casual cruelty of it took Anna's breath away. She'd seen Morrison's capacity for violence firsthand, but hearing about his deliberate torture of an innocent family brought home the true scope of his evil. "The children?" Anna asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "They're living with Elena's husband's brother in Denver now. Good people who love them, but they still wake up screaming some nights. They saw things no child should ever see." Anna understood now why Cole had been willing to spend 3 years tracking one man across half the continent. This wasn't just about justice in the abstract. It was about a family destroyed by senseless cruelty and children who would carry those scars for the rest of their lives. The storm finally began to ease around midnight, but they remained huddled in their shelter until dawn. When the sun finally rose, it revealed a landscape transformed by snow and ice that made travel treacherous, but also starkly beautiful. The red rocks were capped with white, and icicles hung like crystal spears from every overhang. Morrison's directions led them up a series of switchbacks that climbed steadily toward a plateau surrounded by sheer cliff faces. The narrow trail was slick with ice in places, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses carefully around the worst sections. Anna's hands were numb with cold despite her gloves, and she could see her breath forming clouds in the thin mountain air. "The entrance is just ahead," Morrison said as they approached what appeared to be a solid wall of red sandstone. "You'll ride right past it if you don't know what to look for." Cole studied the cliff face carefully, his experienced eye picking out details that Anna couldn't see. There, almost invisible among the natural shadows and weathering patterns, was a crack in the rock just wide enough for a horse and rider to pass through single file. "Clever," Cole admitted grudgingly. "From more than 50 feet away, it looks like solid rock." They approached the hidden entrance cautiously, with Cole leading and Morrison in the middle where he couldn't signal any guards who might be waiting inside. Anna brought up the rear, her hand resting on her pistol and her nerves stretched tight with anticipation. The crack opened into a natural corridor that wound through the heart of the mesa for nearly a quarter mile before emerging into a hidden valley that took Anna's breath away. The canyon was perhaps half a mile long and a quarter mile wide, completely enclosed by towering walls of red rock. A spring-fed stream ran down the center, creating a ribbon of green vegetation in an otherwise harsh landscape. But it was the evidence of human occupation that commanded Anna's attention. There were corrals holding at least 50 head of cattle, several sturdy buildings that looked like they'd been built to withstand harsh weather, and enough supplies stacked under. Canvas covers to outfit a small army. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a fortress and supply depot that could support Morrison's operations for months at a time. "My God," Anna whispered. "How long has this been going on?" 5 years, maybe more, Cole replied, his eyes taking in every detail of the hidden settlement. "This represents thousands of dollars worth of stolen goods and livestock." Morrison's confidence seemed to return as they entered his domain. "You're impressed, I can tell. This operation's bigger than anything you imagined, isn't it? And I'm just one small part of it." Cole ignored the outlaw's boasting, but Anna could see him cataloging everything they observed. The brands on the cattle told stories of ranches raided across 3 territories. The supplies included not just food and ammunition, but luxury goods that had probably been taken from stagecoaches and freight wagons. Most disturbing of all were the chains and shackles that indicated Morrison's involvement in human trafficking hadn't been limited to children like Lucy Williams. They were halfway across the valley when the trap was sprung. Men emerged from concealment among the buildings and rocks, at least 8 of them, all armed and moving with the coordination of a military unit. Anna realized that Morrison's seeming cooperation had been an elaborate deception designed to lead them into an inescapable situation. "I told you there were folks who wouldn't appreciate your interference," Morrison said, his voice filled with savage satisfaction. "Meet my business partners." The men surrounding them weren't typical frontier outlaws. Their clothes were too good, their weapons too well maintained, and their movements too disciplined. These were professionals, possibly former soldiers or lawmen who turned to the wrong side of the law for profit rather than desperation. "Cole Mendoza," called the apparent leader, a well-dressed man with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "We've been expecting you. Mr. Morrison sent word that you might be paying us a visit." Anna felt her heart sink as she realized the full scope of their predicament. Crow, the tracker who'd escaped during the canyon fight, had obviously reached the hideout ahead of them and warned Morrison's allies. They'd ridden directly into a carefully prepared ambush. "Gentlemen," Cole said calmly, his hands visible and away from his weapons, "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." The leader smiled without warmth. "Colonel Marcus Webb, formerly of the 3rd Colorado Volunteers, currently engaged in private enterprise, and you, Mr. Mendoza, have become a significant inconvenience to our operations." Anna studied Webb and his men, beginning to understand the true scope of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't just about Morrison's gang of outlaws. It was about a network of corruption that probably extended into legitimate businesses and possibly even territorial government. "Let me guess," Cole said conversationally, "you provide inside information about valuable shipments. He steals them, and you all split the profits. Very civilized compared to the usual frontier banditry." Webb's smile widened. "You're very perceptive. Yes, we've found it quite profitable to combine Mr. Morrison's enthusiasm for direct action with our knowledge of which targets are worth the risk." Anna realized that her presence had probably saved both their lives, at least temporarily. Webb and his men were clearly planning to kill them, but they were also curious about how much she and Cole had learned about their operation. The need for information was giving them time to think, to look for opportunities. "The woman doesn't look like a bounty hunter," Webb observed, studying Anna with calculating eyes. "What's your story, Mrs. Hayes?" Anna replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Anna Hayes." Recognition flickered across Webb's face. "Ah, the farmer's wife from the wagon train. Morrison mentioned you. I'm afraid your husband's death was simply the cost of doing business, Mrs. Hayes, nothing personal." The casual dismissal of David's murder sparked something fierce and angry in Anna's chest. These men talked about murder and theft as if they were discussing commodity prices, reducing human suffering to nothing more than acceptable overhead in their criminal enterprise. "Nothing personal," Anna repeated, her voice carrying an edge of steel that surprised even her. "You killed my husband and left me to die chained in a barn, and you call that business?" Webb shrugged eloquently. "The frontier is a harsh place, Mrs. Hayes. Only the strong survive, and only the clever prosper. Your husband was neither strong enough nor clever enough to protect what was his." The insult to David's memory pushed Anna past the point of fear into a cold, calculating rage. She began to study their captors more carefully, looking for weaknesses and opportunities. Webb was confident to the point of arrogance, clearly enjoying his position of power. Several of his men seemed more nervous, glancing frequently at the canyon entrance as if expecting reinforcements or trouble. Morrison had been freed from his bonds and was now standing with his allies, his earlier fear replaced by triumphant malice. "What do you think, Colonel? Should we just shoot them here, or would you prefer to make an example of them?" Webb considered the question with the air of a man weighing business alternatives. "I think we need to know exactly how much they've learned about our operations and who else might be aware of their investigation. After that, we'll decide how to dispose of them." Anna caught Cole's eye and saw him give an almost imperceptible nod toward the buildings where the horses were. He was planning something, waiting for the right moment to act. Anna began to shift her weight slightly, preparing to move when the opportunity presented itself. The interrogation began with professional efficiency. Webb's questions were precise and well-informed, designed to map the extent of Cole's knowledge about the criminal network. Anna realized that their captors were particularly concerned about whether Cole had communicated with federal authorities or other bounty hunters. "You're very thorough," Cole observed, after answering several questions about his investigation. "Almost like you've had experience with interrogation." Webb's expression darkened slightly. "The war taught all of us valuable lessons about extracting information from reluctant subjects. Some of those lessons have proven useful in our current endeavors." Anna felt sick as she realized the implications. Webb and his men weren't just former soldiers turned criminal. They were probably war criminals who'd escaped punishment by disappearing into the chaos of the post-war frontier. The casual brutality she'd witnessed made sense now, viewed as the continuation of tactics developed during military campaigns. The questioning continued for nearly an hour, with Webb probing for details about Cole's methods, contacts, and plans. Cole answered carefully, revealing enough to seem cooperative while concealing the most important information about his true capabilities and resources. Finally, Webb seemed satisfied that he'd learned everything useful. "I believe that's sufficient. Gentlemen, Mr. Morrison, would you care to do the honors?" Morrison stepped forward eagerly, drawing his pistol with obvious relish. "I've been looking forward to this moment for a long time." It was then that Cole made his move. Instead of trying to draw his own weapon, he lunged toward the nearest building, tackling Anna and driving both of them behind the cover of a stone wall just as Morrison's first shot rang out. The bullet chipped stone inches from where Anna's head had been. "The horses!" Cole shouted over the sound of gunfire. "We need to reach the horses." Anna followed Cole as he led a desperate dash from building to building, using every scrap of cover to avoid the bullets that whined and sparked around them. Webb's men were professionals, but they'd been caught off guard by the sudden action, and their shots were hurried and poorly aimed in the initial confusion. They reached the corral where their horses were being held just as Webb's men began to organize a systematic search of the buildings. Cole quickly freed Duchess and his own mount, helping Anna into the saddle, before swinging up behind her on his own horse. "The entrance," Anna gasped, pointing toward the crack in the canyon, wall that represented their only escape route. "Too obvious," Cole replied, spurring his horse toward the far end of the valley. "There's got to be another way out of here." They rode hard toward the spring at the head of the canyon, with bullets whistling around them and shouts of pursuit. Growing louder behind them, Anna pressed herself low against Duchess's neck, feeling the powerful muscles of the horse bunching and stretching as the mare ran for her life. The spring emerged from a narrow cleft in the rock wall, and Cole guided them directly toward it without slowing down. Anna saw what he was attempting and felt her heart sink. The cleft was barely wide enough for a horse, and there was no guarantee it led anywhere except deeper into the rock. "Cole, we can't," Anna began, but her words were cut off as they plunged into the narrow passage. The world became a tunnel of red rock and shadows, with the sound of water echoing off stone walls and the terrified breathing of their horses amplified in the confined space. Behind them, Anna could hear Webb's men reaching the entrance to the cleft, their voices echoing as they debated whether to follow. The passage climbed steeply, forcing the horses to scramble over wet rocks and navigate turns so sharp that Anna's knee scraped against the stone walls. Just when she thought they were trapped in a dead end, the cleft opened onto a narrow ledge that ran along the face of the canyon wall. Below them, Webb's men were spreading out through the valley, searching every building and shadow for signs of their escaped prisoners. Anna realized that from their elevated position, she and Cole had a commanding view of the entire criminal operation, and more importantly, a potential escape route along the rim of the canyon. "Can we make it?" Anna asked, studying the treacherous path that wound along the cliff face. Cole's expression was grim but determined. "We don't have a choice. It's this or go back and face Webb's hospitality." They began the terrifying journey along the ledge, leading their horses carefully around obstacles and across gaps where rock slides had broken the path. One wrong step would send them tumbling hundreds of feet to the canyon floor, but the alternative was certain death at the hands of Morrison and his allies. Halfway around the canyon rim, disaster struck. A section of the ledge gave way under the weight of Cole's horse, sending rocks cascading down the cliff face. The gelding scrambled desperately for footing, its hooves slipping on loose stone as Cole fought to keep the animal from going over the edge. Anna acted without thinking, grabbing the reins and throwing her weight backward to help anchor the terrified horse. For a heart-stopping moment, all three of them teetered on the brink of disaster before the gelding managed to regain solid footing. "Thank you," Cole said quietly, his voice shaken by how close they'd come to catastrophe. "We're partners," Anna replied simply. "Partners look out for each other." The words carried more weight than Anna had intended, acknowledging something that had been growing between them throughout their dangerous journey together. They were no longer just a bounty hunter and a widow seeking justice. They had become something more, forged by shared danger and mutual dependence into a team that trusted each other completely. They reached the top of the mesa just as the sun was setting, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of pursuit as Webb's men discovered their escape route and began the dangerous climb up the cliff face. "They'll follow us," Anna observed, studying the terrain ahead for signs of cover or defensive positions. "Yes, they will," Cole agreed. "But now we're back on equal terms. Webb's men are good, but they're not mountain fighters. Out here in the open country, we have the advantage." Anna looked at the vast expanse of wilderness stretching out before them and realized that Cole was right. The hidden canyon had been Morrison's fortress, but the open frontier was Cole's domain. Here, his skills as a tracker and his knowledge of the land would give them the edge they needed to survive. The real test was about to begin. The pursuit across the high mesa lasted 3 days, a deadly game of cat and mouse played out across terrain so harsh that survival itself became a victory. Webb's men were skilled and determined, but Cole had been right about their limitations. In mountain warfare, Anna watched him transform into something almost supernatural, reading the land like a book written in stone and wind, always staying one step ahead of their hunters while gradually wearing them down. On the second day, Cole led them through a series of false trails and deliberate misdirections that split Webb's forces into smaller groups. Anna marveled at his ability to think several moves ahead, setting traps of terrain and weather that turned pursuit into a nightmare for their enemies. When two of Webb's men tried to shortcut through a box canyon, Cole triggered a rock slide that left them stranded and forced the others to abandon the chase long enough to rescue their companions. By the third evening, Anna could see the toll. The pursuit was taking on their hunters. Webb's carefully disciplined unit was beginning to show cracks of exhaustion and frustration. Men who had started the chase with military precision were now making mistakes born of fatigue and desperation. Cole exploited every error, turning the hunters into the hunted with a patience and tactical brilliance that made Anna understand why Morrison had feared him so deeply. The end came at dawn on the fourth day, in a place Cole had been maneuvering toward since their escape from the canyon. They stood on a narrow ridge overlooking a steep-sided valley where a small settlement nestled beside a crystal-clear lake. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Anna could see children playing in dusty streets while their parents went about the business of building civilization in the wilderness. "Silver Falls," Cole announced, pointing toward the town below. "Federal marshals, territorial judges, and more importantly, witnesses who can't be bought or intimidated." Anna stared at the settlement that was supposed to have been her new home with David, the place where they'd planned to build their ranch and raise their children. The sight brought a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for the dreams that had died with her husband, but also a strange sense of completion. Their journey had brought her full circle, back to the destination she'd originally sought, but as a completely different person than the one who'd left Kansas months ago. Webb and his remaining men appeared on the ridge behind them, their horses lathered and their faces grim with the knowledge that they'd been outmaneuvered. The colonel's military bearing was still evident, but Anna could see the desperation beneath his controlled facade. He understood as well as anyone that reaching Silver Falls meant the end of his criminal empire and probably a date with a territorial gallows. "Mendoza," Webb called across the rocky ground that separated them. "You've led us a merry chase, but it ends here. That town down there won't protect you from what's coming." Cole stepped into clear view, his rifle ready but not quite, aimed at their pursuers. "What's coming, Colonel? Justice? The rule of law." I'd think a former military officer would appreciate those concepts. Webb's laugh was bitter and devoid of humor. "Justice? Law? You're talking about abstractions, Mendoza. Out here, the only law that matters is the law of survival, and the only justice is what a man can take for himself." Anna moved to stand beside Cole, her own weapon drawn and ready. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. The partnership that had begun as an alliance of convenience had evolved into something unbreakable, forged in shared danger and mutual respect. "You're wrong about that, Colonel," Anna said, her voice carrying across the morning air with surprising strength. "The law that matters is the one that says innocent people shouldn't have to live in fear of men like you. The justice that counts is the kind that protects children from being sold like cattle and wives from watching their husbands murdered for a few dollars in profit." Morrison, who had been silent during the exchange, suddenly spurred his horse forward. "Enough talking," he snarled. "I'm finishing what I started with these two." The outlaw leader's charge triggered the final confrontation. Webb's men spread out along the ridge, seeking cover among the rocks while maintaining a field of fire that would make any attempt to reach the town below a deadly proposition. Anna found herself pressed behind a boulder, with bullets chipping stone all around her, the familiar sound of gunfire echoing off the canyon walls. But this time was different. This time, Anna wasn't the terrified widow hiding behind supplies while braver people fought for her survival. She'd become someone who fought back, someone who stood her ground against evil and refused to be broken by the cruelties of an unforgiving world. Cole was moving among the rocks with fluid grace, his rifle speaking with deadly precision as he picked off Webb's men one by one. But it was Anna who spotted the real danger. Morrison working his way around the flank, trying to get a clear shot. At Cole's exposed position, without hesitation, Anna left her cover and sprinted across open ground, drawing Morrison's attention and his fire. Bullets whined past her ears as she reached a new position that gave her a clear angle on the outlaw. Leader, when she fired, her shot took Morrison high in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle clattering among the rocks. "This is for David," Anna said quietly, advancing on the wounded outlaw with her pistol steady in her hands. Morrison looked up at her with pain and hatred warring in his eyes. "You think killing me changes anything? There's a dozen more like me out there, and they'll keep coming until every last settler gives up and goes back where they came from." Anna stared down at the man who had destroyed her old life and forced her to discover strengths she'd never known she possessed. "Maybe you're right. Maybe there will always be men like you, but there will also always be people willing to stand up to you, and that's what makes the difference." She could have pulled the trigger. Every instinct of revenge and justice screamed at her to end Morrison's life the way he'd ended David's. But as she looked at the broken, bleeding man at her feet, Anna realized that she'd already won the only victory that truly mattered. She'd survived, she'd grown strong, and she'd proven that evil couldn't break her spirit no matter how hard it tried. Cole appeared beside her, his rifle trained on Morrison, but his eyes studying Anna's face. "Your choice," he said quietly. "Whatever you decide, I'll support." Anna lowered her weapon. "He'll face a judge and jury. That's how civilization works, and that's what makes us different from him." The remaining members of Webb's gang surrendered within the hour, their leader mortally wounded by one of Cole's precisely placed shots. The federal marshals who rode up from Silver Falls found a scene of justice served and a criminal network finally brought to an end. The trials that followed made headlines across 3 territories. Webb's organization had been even more extensive than Cole had suspected, with connections to corrupt officials, unscrupulous businessmen, and a dozen smaller gangs that operated throughout the frontier. The evidence recovered from the hidden canyon led to arrests and convictions that cleaned up corruption from Denver to Santa Fe. Morrison received a death sentence that was carried out on a cold morning in November, with Anna watching from the crowd of spectators who had gathered to see justice done. She felt no satisfaction at his execution, only a quiet sense of closure that allowed her to finally lay David's memory to rest. Cole had been offered a position as a federal marshal, recognition of his skills and his service in breaking up Webb's network. He accepted the appointment with the understanding that he would continue to work primarily in the mountain territories, tracking down the kind of criminals that regular law enforcement couldn't touch. Anna faced her own choice about the future. The territorial government had offered compensation for her losses, enough money to return to Kansas and start over, or to establish herself in any number of frontier communities that needed her skills. She'd proven herself capable of surviving in the harshest conditions, and word of her courage had spread throughout the territory. But the decision that mattered most was personal, not professional. Cole found her standing beside David's grave, in the small cemetery outside Silver Falls, where she'd finally been able to lay her husband to rest properly. The headstone was simple but dignified, marking the final resting place of a good man who died trying to protect an innocent child. "I've been thinking about what you said," Cole began, his voice tentative in a way that Anna had never heard before. "About partnerships and people looking out for each other." Anna turned to face him, studying the man who had saved her life and helped her discover her own strength. Cole Mendoza was still dangerous, still haunted by his own losses, but he was also honorable and kind in ways that went beyond mere duty. "What have you been thinking?" Anna asked. Cole removed his hat and held it awkwardly in his hands, suddenly, looking younger and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "I've been thinking that I don't want to go back to hunting alone. These past weeks, having someone to trust completely, someone who watches my back and shares the load. It's made me realize how empty my life has been." Anna felt her heart beating faster, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. "That sounds like a practical arrangement, partners in law enforcement." "It could be that," Cole agreed carefully. "Or it could be something more, if you're interested. I know it's too soon after David, and I know you probably have other plans." Anna silenced him by stepping closer and placing her hand on his arm. "Cole Mendoza, are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to come home with me," Cole replied, his voice gaining strength and certainty. "To my sister's ranch outside Santa Fe, where there are people who will welcome you as family, and work that needs doing, and a life that we could build together. I'm asking you to be my partner in everything, not just the dangerous parts." Anna looked back at David's grave, saying a silent goodbye to the dreams they'd shared and the life they'd planned together. David would have wanted her to be happy, to find someone who could love and protect her the way he had. More importantly, David would have been proud of the woman she'd become, strong enough to make her own choices and brave enough to embrace new possibilities. "Yes," Anna said simply, "I'll come home with you." Cole's smile transformed his entire face, erasing years of hardness and grief. He pulled Anna into his arms, holding her close as the wind whispered through the pines and the sun set behind the mountains that had tested them both and found them worthy. They were married 3 weeks later in the church at Silver Falls, with Margaret Williams and her family in attendance, along with half the town. Lucy Williams served as Anna's flower girl, her bright smile a reminder of why their fight against evil had been so important. The little girl, who had once been chained in Morrison's barn, was now free to grow up in a world made slightly safer by their efforts. The ranch outside Santa Fe was everything Cole had promised. Rolling hills perfect for cattle, a sturdy house built to withstand mountain winters, and a family that welcomed Anna with warmth and generosity. Cole's sister Maria proved to be a woman of strength and wisdom, who understood immediately why her brother had fallen in love with the farmer's wife, who'd become a hunter of men. Anna threw herself into ranch life with the same determination she'd brought to tracking outlaws. She learned to manage cattle, to read weather patterns, to navigate the complex social dynamics of a community that included Mexican ranchers, Anglo settlers, and Pueblo farmers who had worked the land for countless generations. But she never forgot the lessons learned during those weeks in the wilderness. When trouble came to their valley, as it inevitably did in a frontier territory, Anna stood ready to fight alongside Cole and their neighbors. She'd discovered that strength once, in the crucible of loss and danger, and she would never let it go. Years later, when their own children asked about the scars on her wrists and the distant look that sometimes crossed her face during thunderstorms, Anna would tell them about the importance of standing up to evil, of never giving up hope, and of the unexpected places where strength and love could be found. She would tell them about David, the good man who had loved her first and whose memory would always hold a place in her heart. And she would tell them about Cole, the man who had cut her free from more than just physical chains and said the words that changed everything, "Come home." The frontier had tested Anna Hayes and found her unbreakable. In losing everything she thought she needed, she had discovered everything she truly was, and in the end, that had made all the difference. The story of Anna and Cole became legend in the territory, told around campfires and in frontier newspapers as an example of how ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to surrender to the darkness. It was a reminder that even in the harshest places, even when the odds seemed impossible, there was always hope for those brave enough to fight for it. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very strong, fighting for justice could lead you home to something better than anything you'd ever dreamed possible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.